Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. So today we're going to be having a quick look at React Router. We're going to be building a very basic, super minimal clone of React Router. It won't have nearly as much of the features, but it will kind of hopefully give you an idea of how it works in general. I did a live stream on this very recently where we actually dived into the code. We downloaded the source code, dived into it, and actually looked at each component and seen how it works. If you're interested in that, I'll leave a link. But in this video, we're just doing a very quick summary and basically building a clone that will hopefully work. So if you enjoy this kind of content, please consider subscribing, and let's get right into it. So I've just got a brand new React app project here, and I've just made this using Vite, and I've removed some of the boilerplate. So just standard, it's got the index HTML, which points to the main JSX, and we're just going to be playing in the main JSX here, just the one file, just to keep it as simple as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to head over to the React Router documentation. The idea here is I'm going to copy kind of a sample from the documentation, a very simple sample, make sure it works, and then I'm just going to remove the React Router dependency completely and try get it work without that. So I am going to head over to the dev branch. So this uses React Router v6, which is I think still in beta mode. So v5 is what's out now. Yeah, beta mode. And I think in terms of API, they might be slightly different. There might be a few kind of slightly different components, but generally the concept is very similar. So it should be fine in terms of understanding how it works. And I'm going to head over to the docs directory. I'm going to go over to getting started. And I'm basically just going to start copying over this very simple sample and see how it works. So I'll copy over the imports, and I think I need to add a link as well. I'm going to copy over the roots here from the app. Actually, what I'll do is I'll copy over the entire app here, but that's fine actually for now. I'm going to scroll down and just have a quick look at the navigation. So I'm going to copy these two components here. So we're basically going to have a home app and an about app, and they will just be simple H1. So I'm just going to remove everything else from this home app, and I'm just going to move the navigation to the main app here. So that will keep it very simple. Just convert that just to remove some space, and of course I'm going to add yarn add React Router DOM, and I'm just going to make sure I do at 6, and I'm also going to add history, which is a pure dependency of React Router. So I'm just going to add that in here, and I think that needs to be version 5. So let's just go for the latest version. That's fine. Close this, and I'll just restart my dev server just in case, and head over to Vite on the right hand side here. Just refresh this. Let's see what the issue is here. Of course, I've forgotten to add the router at the top level here. So I'm going to remove the strict mode here. We don't really need it. I'm just going to wrap my app in router, and I'm going to come back here and refresh the page. There we go. So what we have here is we have the kind of the top level router component wrapping our entire app. And then within our app, we have navigation, which is basically a few links to homepage or about page. And then we have a routes component. So that's component number 2, number 3, including the link. And then we have the actual route that we're playing with. So slash goes to home, and about goes to about. So as I click these two, I can basically navigate back and forth. As simple as that. Great. Now, a good starting point for me usually is to inspect the element and just have a look at the DOM elements that are actually being created. You can see here we've got kind of a few components. We've got the router, we've got the link, we've got the routes, and the route itself. And of all of these, I think the link is really the only one that creates DOM elements for us, right? So if we jump into elements, we select one of these links, we can just see that we're basically rendering A tags, standard HTML links. There is a bit more logic going on behind the scenes with React Router in how it creates the actual href. It handles a few pieces. You can see here, for example, we don't have the slash at the start, but it is being added here on the link. So there's a few things going on there, but at the very base level, basically it's just rendering a link tag for us to use. And then there's no real other reference to anything else going on in terms of routing. We can see that our about page is being rendered, of course, and there's no kind of trace of our homepage, which is what we'd expect. So everything's kind of standard here. Yeah, let's go on and have a quick look at the elements and see how they work. So we're going to start off with the router component. Now this is going to wrap the entire application. And what I have here is I have React Router open up locally, and I've opened it up on, so within the packages directory, React Router index TSX, we have a router component. Actually, the structure of React Router is actually quite very simple. It's basically got its different packages, some monorepo, but everything's essentially contained within one file, which is the index TSX. We can see all the different kind of components there. It's actually quite easy to look through. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a very brief look at React Router here, well, the router component. And the only thing that we need to understand here is that, as well as kind of the props that are coming in, it basically checks if you're inside a router, but really all it's providing is a couple of context providers here. And in this case, the navigator one is basically history, which we'll look at in a second. And then we have the location provider. So in terms of what is history and what is location, well, we can have a quick look at the browser for that. So of course, the main thing with the browsers, different browsers are going to have slightly, potentially slightly different implementations. And if you're outside of the browser, like React Native, or just not in in a node environment, these don't exist. So of course, React Router kind of abstracts all this out and makes it all simple to understand. But if you head over to the console here, under the window, we have both location, which you can see there, and we have history, right? And these are re-exported at the top level. So I'm going to enter on history. I'm going to enter on location. If we have a quick look at these objects just to understand what they do, the history is essentially what it sounds like, the history of the tab, everything that you've browsed. So as I click on these links, about home, a few more times, we can see that basically it's adding to essentially a queue or a stack, whatever you want to call it, a list of history items. And we can't access the history items directly, but what we can access is the number of history items that we have, and we can access basically the navigation between the different histories. So here we can see that as I click more, if I go on history again, it's gone up in length. So that's just going to keep increasing. And then what you can do is you can then use history to do things like go. You can see I've done this before, go -1. So you can basically get a delta and move back and forward, basically. Or you can do forward and back, etc. So there's a few things you can do with history, but that's basically manipulating exactly what sounds like the history of the tab, right? So that's the history provider. In terms of location is basically everything to do with the URL. So if I open up the location here, we can see we have the host, which is localhost 3000. It's got the host name, the path name. And if we add, or if you jump to about, and again, we click on location here, hopefully you can see that. Location, we can now see that, again, it's got everything the same, but it's also now got this path name that you're on. And within React Router, there's a few kind of helper methods. I think if you've got, different path parameters, etc., it gives you the ability to parse them easily, etc. So that's basically what the history and the location does. In our little clone, we don't need to add these additional providers because we're just going to use the history and location directly from the browser. And that's simple as it gets there. So next up, we've covered the router. Let's have a quick look at the routes. And again, we can head over here and go over to the routes component, which is just here. And let's expand this. And you can see there's a couple of things going on here. I'm not going to dive much deeper into this, but you can see the main things is it's creating routes from children, and then it's returning this hook use routes. And we will actually dive into this just to see how it's rendering. But the first step it does is it's basically going through all its children and reading the props, reading the different elements and trying to create a sort of route tree or a list of routes that all the children provide, right? And then in this use routes hook, we can just expand this for a moment. There's a bit of kind of logic going on. Obviously, this is where the matching goes on. So we're matching the URL, which we've taken from the location, and we're checking it against all the different routes from the routes we've just received. And then we're actually just basically taking all the matches, so anything that matches the location and the current routes, and we're basically going through and rendering them all in kind of a nested structure within components. So the routes here is actually doing bulk of the work. It's, like I said, going through all the children, finding the routes that are available, and then doing the logic to figure out which ones should be rendered, which ones shouldn't, and then actually rendering the routes. So that leaves the question, if the routes is rendering everything, what does the route component do? And if we head over to the route component, you can see, I think it's this one here, doesn't actually do anything. The route component, I think, from what I can see, is basically just a container for the path for the element for the different props. And you can see here that, ignore this invariant here, it doesn't actually do any rendering itself. So it's just a way to declare these are, the different roots. It's actually the roots component, which is one level above, the one that does the actual rendering, which I thought was, a pretty interesting way to do things. So the final thing that I want to show here is the link component. And the link component exists within the React Router DOM because this is a browser link. So I'll jump over to React Router DOM and I will just look for the link component. And we've already had a quick look at the link component in the browser, and you can basically see it does a very little logic here. It's essentially forwarding all the props. It does a bit of logic for handling clicks, but essentially it's just rendering an A tag and passing in some of the props. And like I said earlier on, use href, this hook, it basically takes the actual link and it kind of formats it nicely. So that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover in terms of React Router, and that hopefully gives you an idea how it works. So this gives us everything we need to very quickly build a clone. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing I'm going to do, like I said, I'm going to remove this import, refresh this page. It's not working, router isn't defined. Let's get to work on these, right? So I'm going to define router. And as we said, router is basically just kind of a wrapper that adds some context onto the roots, right? Adds the history context, adds the location context. We have them in the browser. So what I'm going to do is actually, I'm just going to ignore kind of rendering anything here, and I'm just going to render the children, right? So I'm just going to pass that through, render the children, refresh this. Okay, router is done. Now link is not defined, and move on to the next one. Link, like we said, is basically just an A tag. So I'm going to take essentially all the props here, and I'm just going to render an A tag with the props. So I'm just going to spread over the props. So I'm going to say every prop that you pass into the link, just pass it to the A tag, with the exception that the link takes in a 2 prop, whereas in the A tag it's called href. So what we can do here is we can just wrap that in brackets. So we're going to destructure the 2 tag. We're going to spread the props. So that's basically the rest of the props. And we're just going to explicitly add in href and pass in the 2 tag. That's it. That's all we need for the link. So that should be relatively simple there. So next up, we have the roots and the root. So if we do the root first, because that's a simpler one. Again, we basically said that the root doesn't actually do anything. It just takes in some props and it holds that for the roots component to render, but the root itself doesn't do anything. So I'm just going to create basically an empty component here. So root just returns null. And the kind of, I guess, the most interesting one is the roots component. And the roots component is the one that's doing the bulk of the work, and it's all based around the children. We don't really do anything else. We just take in the children. And what we want to do is we want to, like we said, we want to go over all the children and kind of do matching logic and then render whatever. That can get quite complicated. So I'm going to do the most simple version of this possible. I'm going to use the react.children helper method. So this is just going to iterate through all the nested children. We're going to do map, and we're going to pass in the children here. And we're just going to pass in a map function. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to see if the location path matches the root path exactly as is, then render the child. Otherwise, basically just ignore it. So we can do that by just saying if the child.props.path is equal to location.pathname. So if it's equal, we want to render, or we want to return child.props.element. These are coming from, remember, the root there. So I'm just going to, let's just enter here so we can see that. Otherwise, we want to return null. And I think that should be it. So if I refresh this guy, so that's rendering the home fine, not the about fine. Of course, in this case, it's handling things like the starting slash, and the link adds that, and it all kind of works. In this case, we don't have it, so let's just quickly add the slash about on both places. And now we refresh this. We have the home, we have the about. It's absolutely working fine. So this is the absolute minimal way. Of course, this won't work with kind of nested components, and it doesn't work with anything more complicated than what we have here, but this is hopefully kind of gives you the idea of the very basic concepts of client-side routing and in general how React Router works. So I think that's everything I wanted to cover in this video. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day, and I will see you in the next one.